Hello and welcome to American Friction, back today with our very first interview episode. How exciting. For this edition, Nikki and I had the pleasure of speaking to Doug Jones, former Democratic Senator for Alabama. He's now a distinguished senior fellow with American Progress and still has a whole lot of strong opinions about what is going on in American politics. We discussed how to handle the MAGA administration, where the Democrats should go next, how they push back whilst being in the minority, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello, Doug. Welcome to American Friction.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Doug, you wargamed the scenario of there being another coup, and it was very much played out in the sort of style that January 6th was carried out. What we're seeing, though, now from Trump and Musk is being described as a coup. Did you ever envisage that we could see a coup happening quite in the way it is at the moment?
Well, look, I don't use the word coup with what's going on right now. I consider January 6th an attempted coup, an insurrection. I tend to think that is more of a violent overthrow. Or, in the case of January 6th, someone who was wanting to stay in power. What I see right now going on is a dramatic, and I can understand, by the way, why people would call it a coup, because it is such a dramatic effort to reform the government of the United States and to make the presidency of the United States basically all powerful. And that is so far afield from where we have been in this country that it's a little bit frightening for democracy. I think people are just now waking up to the fact that there is far more happening than what they had bargained for when they voted back in November. And we'll see how this plays out. But I do think that, on the one hand, I think that Donald Trump is doing many of those things that he has said that he wanted to do in the campaign. Cut government. I don't think people realize that he was going to just try to dismantle government the way he's doing. I think that everything he's doing right now is probably magnified what he said during the campaign. So there's not an awful lot of surprises. The speed and the just ferociousness of what they're doing right now is unsettling. But I think Democrats are getting their footing and the courts are getting their footing. So we'll see how this plays out going forward.
Obviously, at the moment, we haven't seen the scale of political violence that we saw on January 6th. Do you think that we do have to be conscious to not let that, America has to be conscious to not let that lull them into a false sense of security? There are clearly still Trump supporters who, given opportunity, will want to behave in violent ways, even though they're getting everything they want at the moment, it seems.
Sure. Yeah. Look, political violence is something I've been concerned about for a number of years. It's not just post-November 2024 election. I think that a lot of the rhetoric that's going on, and I've even said rhetoric sometimes from the left, kind of fosters the idea of political violence as a means to an end. So I think people are concerned about that. They should be concerned. At the end of the day, what we're seeing happening is the ability to reform and change government without that kind of violence. Look, at the end of the day, I'm going to be very, very optimistic about the American people, that they're not going to allow some kind of violent overthrow. We're not going to end up in a civil war where we're pitting brother against brother like we did in the 1860s. That said, there are people that just you cannot control. And there are people out there in this world from both the right and the left who hear things differently and they see signals differently. And they will sometimes act on those thinking that they are taking orders, thinking that is the right thing to do. And we've got to be very conscious of that. And quite frankly, I'm hoping that the Trump administration will also be very careful with their rhetoric and what's going on about potential political violence. I think they've spawned some in the past. I think Democrats have to do that too. I think we all have to do this from an establishment and a systematic and an institutional standpoint to push back, to let them work how they're going to do it. But political violence is here, and we need to be very, very, very conscious of the possibility in the future.
With pushing back on the rhetoric, that's one thing. But you're a man of the law, and at the moment, clearly the law isn't very fashionable among the MAGA crowd, at least. Are there legal routes to pursue against Trump when he's saying he'll ignore the law? So how do you deal legally with someone ignoring it? What would be your strategy there?
Well, look, I think we've got to plan for that. I know he is saying that. But I also think we have to look back at the history of both Donald Trump as well as this country. People can say a lot of things. And one of the things that you have seen over the years with Donald Trump is that he likes to bully people. He likes to, I don't want to use the word threaten in a physical violence sense, but threaten folks, threaten their careers, threaten to run a candidate against a Republican incumbent in a Republican primary and try to bully his way to get his way. He has done that with courts. He has done that with Congress. He has done that with people across the country. And I think that's a lot of what is going on right now, to try to mold the courts and opinion to his liking. We'll see how that works out. I have, again, I'm some would say maybe Pollyannish, but I think I'm going to give the judiciary a good bit of credit. Donald Trump is going to win some cases and he's going to lose some cases. So I think that right now they're setting a stage to really try to mold opinion their way. And that's not, look, this has been done before. Franklin D. Roosevelt did that with threatening to pack the Supreme Court back in the 1930s so that he could get opinions that would, promote his New Deal legislation and administration. So we'll see where this goes. I think at the end of the day, so far, Donald Trump has had a history of abiding by court orders. And I think we have to take him at his word that he will do that. He said that the other day, but we'll see where things go. I don't think we're at that constitutional crisis yet. They could be setting something up. But let's see how this plays out a little bit, because I think that folks can be prepared to respond if that happens. But it may depend on the issue at hand.
So, Senator, during your time in Congress, at least for a chunk of it, you were a member of the minority party. And I think, the common wisdom in the United States is that the minority party, particularly a minority in both chambers, is powerless against the majority. But I'd like to know, in your experience, what can Democrats do to remain a legislative force that not only can help sort of prevent some of the more draconian legislation that might be pushed through by Republicans, but also to continue representing the interests of their own constituents who may not be as represented in this moment?
Yeah, well, look, right now there's a number of things that you can do, and I think you're going to see that happening. One of the things people, I think, need to understand is that for the first month of this presidency, we have been focused on nominations, cabinet secretaries and other nominations. That has dominated the legislative process right now. You didn't hear a lot coming from the Speaker of the House and Republicans in the House of Representatives because all of the focus has been on the nominations. So there's been this sense that Democrats are not doing anything, that they're flailing around. Yeah. I don't think that that's the case. And I want to be cautious here a little bit, because you have to say under current Senate rules, the Democrats can do a number of things. At this point, there is still a 60-vote threshold for legislation to pass. That will be for every appropriations bill that they start putting forward, whether it's a one bill or two bill, working with the Senate majority and the House majority. It's still in the Senate of the United States got to get 60 votes. The only exception to that, other than nominations, is what they call a reconciliation bill. That's how the president wants to do his extensions of the tax cuts from 2017. That only requires a majority, but that's not going to fund the government of the United States going forward. We're looking at March, at the end of a continuing resolution, that the government may shut down if they can't come to some agreement. That gives Democrats some leverage to be able to stop some things that they see going on, to challenge things that they see going on, and going forward with legislation, not only there, but with the National Defense Authorization Act, other measures that will come before the Senate floor. assuming that Republicans do not change the rules to require a simple majority. And remember, Donald Trump wanted Republicans to do that. In 2017 and 2018, Senator McConnell did not do that. And Democrats, by the way, wanted Senator Schumer to do that, to change the rules for certain things. And you had a couple of Democrats saying no. And candidly, guys, I'm going to tell you, I talked to a lot of my former colleagues. There were other Democrats who really did not want to change the filibuster rule because they could see the handwriting on the wall that things could change. So I think you'll see Democrats, at least in the Senate, being able to use those rules more, and hopefully they will stay in place. That will give Democrats some leverage. The other thing that I think Democrats in the House and the Senate both can do, and they did this during the Senate nomination hearings, and that's just to put down markers, to continue in these hearings and on the Senate floor to talk about the things that are important to the American people, to talk about their agendas, to talk about things that not just to oppose what the President of the United States is doing, but to offer solutions, offer their own ways to make government more efficient and work for people. One thing that I really would like to see, and I'm going to kind of get out more, I think, up front on this in the coming days, the one thing I would really like to see Democrats in the House and the Senate do is to go out into the country. Don't just stay in Washington, D.C. and hold press conferences, whether they're a press conference at the Capitol or in front of a building. Go out and have what I call mock hearings. Republicans are never going to sanction field hearings in which Democrats can control the agenda. But let the Senate campaign committee, let the House Democratic House campaign committee fund senators and members of Congress to go into the country, go into the red states, go into the red districts, and have not town halls, which are just people speaking to the choir, but have them talk about and have witnesses come in and take testimony about how these cuts are going to affect everyday Americans. What's going to happen when you cut the NIH grants? What's going to happen when you cut Social Security or Medicaid? How important is this to the people in their everyday lives? And make this very local. Make this very local. You know, Tip O'Neill, former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. Well, in today's day and age, with podcasts like yours and other things, it's really more national. But here's the bottom line. All politics is personal. And Democrats have to make their political agenda personal to the American people, to let them know that they're going to be working for them. And the only way you can do that is to get out into the people, get out into the American public and talk to them and listen.
Doug, in a previous interview, you spoke about when you ran your race, not wanting to call yourself an Alabama Democrat because of maybe some of the connotations that were linked with the old school Alabama Democrats and who they were. Do Democrats in some ways need to stop thinking that their past means as much as they think it does? Do we live in more of a world at the moment where your past record doesn't particularly count for very much, and that's why things such as you just described, going out back in facing the public, is much more important?
Yeah, no, I it's a good point, and I think it's a little bit of both. You know, the Democrats' problem right now is that we have been branded as a far left party because we've not gone onto the platforms where people are getting their information these days. We rely too much on the corporate media and our own podcast and things like that, and our own social media. And we haven't gone into areas where I think people are actually getting information, which I distinguish information from news. A lot of people just don't give a damn about the news anymore. They don't care to read or hear or watch CNN or MSNBC, and they're getting information that they enjoy, that they want to find out about, but it's not always politics. And Democrats have to get into those platforms a little bit, and that makes things such that when they get information and all they're hearing is that Democrats are socialist leftists, then they come to see the Democratic Party in a way that is just not accurate. Yes, there are those voices in the party, but that's not the whole of the Democratic Party. And we've got to make sure that I think people are seeing what we want to do. That's a combination of reminding people where Democrats have come from and where we want to go for them. Again, all politics is personal. And the reason I really kind of stayed away, I stayed away from the Alabama Democrat, the Southern Democrat, for so long when I was growing up, was really a different connotation.
Yeah.
I'm a Democrat not for civil rights. And that's just not the case anymore. And Democrats do have some national identity. The problem is I don't think people really know that identity and how more center left that is rather than the far left that we hear with defund the police and things like that. It's going to be up to us. It's going to be up to Democrats to define ourselves and not let the other side do it.
I find hearing someone such as yourself speaking with this level of nuance quite refreshing, because a lot of the time when we look at a lot of media hits, it's 2 to 3 minutes and it's straight to the point. But for example, you said previously that you think Joe Biden is a top 10 definitely and potentially a top 5 president. And I appreciated you being measured at that point and how you were describing him. But while we're in an information space where Trump supporters call their candidate, called Donald Trump, the best ever all of the time, does being measured sometimes put Democrats on the back foot? And is there a point? Is there maybe a case for Democrats becoming a bit more comfortable with a bit of hyperbole?
Well, I think part of the problem is that Democrats have been, the far left has been full of hyperbole over the years, and that's why people felt the left had so much momentum when they really didn't. It was really that center. Look, I'm not one to try to just be hyperbolic just for the sake of doing that and getting clicks on social media. I think Democrats need to be measured. I think Democrats need to be authentic. I think that we need to call out misinformation, disinformation when it's there, but we also have to call out and have our own programs. So, I don't want to fall in the trap, I think, of just simply becoming the hyperbole on the left that the way that Donald Trump supporters are on the right. You're not going to change their minds by doing that. And we need to get those reasonable folks. They need to get the folks in the middle, which there's still a huge swath of, center right, center left, folks that are pragmatic, that care about their futures, that care about the country, that are patriotic. And that's the folks that we need to talk to and to try to do. And I don't think that you do that with hyperbole.
I want to dig a little into this sort of tension that exists, even among Democrats, between this more of like center core of the party and this concept of the far left. I think for years now, we've seen sort of that tension of like which direction the party want to go, lumping a lot of the sort of farther left's ideology into this sort of like defund the police, all that kind of thing. When looking back at the 2024 election, I've heard a lot of feedback that if Democrats as a party had leaned harder into things like healthcare reform, strengthening the social safety net, a lot of these policies that Republicans accuse of being like socialism, borderline communism, that sort of pseudo-populist message would have resonated a lot more with voters. And I'm curious if you see any sort of positive, anything that the sort of farther left wing of the party was getting right that the Democratic establishment should maybe think of adopting looking toward the midterms, especially when we know that Trump is drilling really hard on issues of the working class, things like healthcare. He may not fulfill all the promises he made, but the messaging was there for him.
Yeah, look, yes, I believe that the left of our party, the thing that they do the best is get that message out. They are ahead of the party itself in terms of their ability to use social media to get their message out. And I think the Democrats have got to do that. And this is what I've said for a long time now, but especially after the 2024 election. Democrats just have not gone to places where people are getting their information. Jesse Waters the other day on Fox News, I rarely ever agree with anything that guy says. But he talked about the information war that was going on, and that Republicans were playing with 21st century technology, and Democrats are still living in the 1990s. I said on MSNBC the other night that we're actually living in the 1890s because we're not going there. And so I think a lot of the Democratic messages on health care reform, on working individuals, workers, and minimum wage, health care benefits, those kitchen table issues, I think were those populist programs. Where we failed was trying to make sure folks understood what the Biden-Harris administration had been doing to try to ease the burden of high prices. People confused inflation, the economy, simply with high prices. People were concerned about high prices, and we didn't adequately address what we were doing to try to make sure people could weather the storm of high prices, bringing up wages, doing the things, building our GDP, doing all of those things to get wages up where people could weather that storm. People were still concerned about the prices as much as anything.
Yeah.
That's where we failed. That's the message. But the bottom line is, and I still believe this, that if the Democrats had been able in the right platforms and the right venues to get out what we've been doing, what we stood for, what the Biden-Harris did, the election could have turned out far differently.
Doug, on a slightly wider note, just away from sort of, big P politics, looking more at the societal level of things. In your previous role as Attorney General in Alabama, you convicted 2 KKK members responsible for a deadly attack on a church, a really horrific crime there. You said, speaking around that the overall political and social climate in the country gave those people cover to behave as they did. Do you fear that America is backtracking? And is there, away from, as you say, Washington politics, even state politics, for communities, what would be your advice to sort of normal people to prevent that sort of cover allowing those sort of acts to resurge?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about a few moments ago with political violence. One quick correction. I wasn't the Attorney General of Alabama. It was the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, federal prosecutor rather than state, even though we did those cases in state court. But I do think we have backslid. I do think we have backtracked. In the Jim Crow South, there was essentially a permission structure by political, business leaders, social leaders that just turned and they either promoted things, they used what we called the dog whistle politics and to say things that would give that permission structure for violence to occur, to try to do things to stop school desegregation, to stop the integration of public facilities, to make sure that a race of people stayed in a different place, in a place where they were post a Civil War, rather than the equality that the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act tried to ensure. And I've said for years now, this is not a new phenomenon with me. I've said for the last 10 or so years that we seem to be backtracking on that. And that the more people do and the more dog whistles that we see coming out of public figures, then it is a permission structure for violence. I think, quite frankly, January 6th is the perfect example of that, where I believe that there are so many people that saw a permission structure that the President of the United States was saying, we've got to stop this certification at all cost. And they acted on it on that day. I worry about that from any number of angles, but I also see the rollback of civil rights, equal rights, all of the measures that are being taken right now to do away with what I see the identity of individuals and to protect individuals, whether it's a different race or different religion or different sexual orientation. I just don't think that that's who America is. I don't think that's why. I don't think it's what we were founded on. I don't think that's who we are, but I worry that there are people that will see that as a way to commit violence in the future, in the same way that I think George Wallace and Bull Connor and gave permission for those guys to essentially bomb a church, that killed 4 young girls.
Doug, a final question, and I'd like to just end on a slightly more positive note, hopefully. I'd like to just ask you, what are you focused on at the moment when it comes to your political work, and what does give you hope at this juncture, which I feel like a lot of people at the moment are feeling somewhat hopeless. So what's giving you hope?
What really gives me hope are 2 things. One is just the American people and the American spirit. I've seen the divisions, and I see we're divided more than we have been in so long. But at the end of the day, I think people have an abiding love for this country, and that they have been satisfied. They've seen the success of the United States of America over the last 250 years, and they want to maintain that. They want to maintain the standing that we have in the world. I see hope in the people that are going to reject a move by the President of the United States to befriend Vladimir Putin and jump on the side of Russia in a war against Ukraine, rather than on the side of democracy and Europe, of which has been the strongest alliance, I think, in the history of the world. So I'm also kind of heartened by a lot of the activism I see in younger people who are, the only thing I would say to the younger folks is that to borrow the Mick Jagger school of politics, you can't always get what you want, but if you just try sometime, you might find you get what you need. And sometimes our youth are so active, they're so zealous, they are so firmly believe in what they think is the right move for the country, that they want it all and can't necessarily see the avenues of compromise where they don't have to compromise those goals, but the ways that you can get there. So I believe there's a lot that is going to happen in the next year. Not all of it is going to be good. I think we've ended for some rocky and some choppy waters out there. But the fact is, I have faith in the resilience of the American people, that they're going to come back in a way that preserves our democracy, preserves our institutions of government that has served us so well and served individuals so well over the last 250 years. We've been up, we've been down, but at the end of the day, we're still on the top of the world in the eyes of the world, and we're gonna stay there.
Doug, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure, guys. Anytime.
Thank you so much, Senator.
And that was our interview with former Alabama Senator Doug Jones. As ever, if you enjoy American Friction, we'd really appreciate it if you could go down wherever you're listening and make sure you subscribe and rate and review us. And if you want more from American Friction, remember you can support us on Patreon. There's a link in the show notes, or go to patreon.com/American Friction. That's patreon.com/American Friction. We'll be back on Friday with another episode.